I'll start off by introducing myself. Hello, everybody. I'm Jennifer Scheich. I'm with Farm Journal's Pork. I recognize a lot of your names, but I see a few new ones, so I'm excited to have you join us for our Livestock Publication Council Coffee collaboration. This is our monthly 45-minute chat to talk about topics that we experience day to day in our different roles within agricultural communications. We try to mix it up and provide something a little different each time. And our topic today is going to be about writing and how we can spice up our writing a bit, what we need to do to draw people in. And so I've brought in two writers that I respect who I think do a great job with not only writing fabulous copy, but also drawing readers in with headlines and subheads and all those other parts that are really important to how we get those stories out. But before I turn things over to them, I'd like to welcome Lindsay, our director of LPC. She's going to share a few quick announcements.
Good morning. Good to see you all this morning. Just have a couple of announcements. Wanted to remind you that the LPC Awards contest will be opening in about a month. That is the annual awards contest for Livestock Publications Council. There's a little over 50 different categories if you're not familiar, but that also includes the writer, photographer, and designer awards. So please be on the lookout for information coming in the March Actiongram, as well as on our Facebook and through some e-blasts as well, that we will have an awards contest opening soon in about a month. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight is that Ag Media Summit is in Raleigh, North Carolina this summer. The dates are July 16th through the 20th. And also be on the lookout for registration opening for that event soon. It's going to be awesome. I think, yes, it will be hot. Yes, it will be humid, but the good news is we're inside and we have air conditioning. So it should be great. We've got a great lineup of education that we will be bringing, as well as the standard AMS opportunity for networking and catching up with friends across the industry. So that's just a few things. Like I said, it'll be in the AMS or LPC Actiongram in March. We'll also be opening our membership renewal period April 1 through June 1. Next thing coming down the pike too.
Thanks, Lindsay. So if you guys have never been on one of these before, I just want to point out the chat section. That's where we typically ask our questions as we go. So please don't hesitate to throw questions or comments. You know, we want this to be a conversation. So we invite speakers in to share their perspective, and then we open it up at questions at the end. But we absolutely welcome conversation over in the chat section as we go, because really, they're sharing their viewpoints, but I know I can probably speak for both of them that no one has all the answers or all the right ideas, and definitely writing is not a science. And so there's always things we can glean from each other. So please feel free to do that. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today. I'll start off by introducing Taylor Leach. Taylor, if you want to wave, she is the digital content producer for Dairy Herd Management. And I get the privilege of working with her in the Farm Journal family every day. And she's fabulous and comes at us with a lot of great perspectives and viewpoints. And she is going to, I'll have her introduce herself here in just a little bit, but we're going to start off with Holly Clanahan, if you want to raise your hand. She is the managing editor of the American Quarter Horse Journal and a fabulous writer. And so Holly, we'll turn things over to you to get this started.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Well, I'm glad to be here. I hope I have a little bit of wisdom to share with you guys. I've actually been with AQHA since 2000. And before that, I worked in newspapers. I've always been a horse girl, but my background and my education was in print journalism for newspapers. So that's kind of where I come at things. And the headline tips I'm going to be giving you guys are really geared more towards print, not SEO. We'll let Taylor deal with that. So, but I will go ahead and share my screen here and get going. Okay, can you guys all see that? Okay, perfect. Okay, so I wanted to start out with something kind of fun. Okay, here we go. These are some newspaper headlines that didn't work so well. We have a great opportunity with headlines to either draw readers in or run them off. So these are some really interesting headlines. That first one, it could be a professor of Greek philosophy, or maybe we're not sure if he's dead or not. So Dole and Bush are dead, even in the Kansas polls, or something like that. The third one, I think everyone wants good legal help. You don't want bad advice, even if it's free. And the last one, I have been in some long lines myself, so I relate to that, although I don't want to write that. So that's exactly what we don't want to do with headlines. We don't want to make our readers pause and try to figure out exactly what we mean. What we want in a headline is clarity and accuracy. And once you've got those two things solid, then you can work on your creativity. So, but headlines do create reactions. As I said earlier, they're either going to draw the reader in and make the reader decide that, hey, maybe this is worth some of my precious time. In terms of an entry point, if you are dealing with a publication that's kind of a newspaper style, the headline's the only thing you've got to draw that reader in. If you're dealing with more of a feature layout like we do in the journal, you'll have the lead art, potentially your cut line if that's placed in a prominent place, and then the reader's eye will go next to the headline. And they decide almost instantaneously if it's worth their time or not. So we really don't have very long to make an impression. So that's why it's definitely worth it to spend your extra time on those headlines. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is make sure that everything is congruent. We want everything to play well together. We want the headline, the art, everything to have the same feel. So if you're writing a hard news headline, please don't make a pun or anything terrible in your headline. Just play it straight. But by the same token, if you have a humor column or a personal column, you've got some more leeway. So I have some examples here that, hang on just a second, let me move this where I can see it. In case you can't read that deck, this is a feature story on Boots O'Neill. The head is a man called Boots. And the deck says, for the past 7 decades, Boots O'Neill, 89, has cowboyed on some of the largest ranches in the country, including the JA, the Matador, Wagner, and 4 Sixes in Texas, and the ORO and Babbitt in Arizona. So right there, it immediately tells me it's a personality profile. This guy's got some really cool cowboy stories. So as a reader, I'm in. Okay, this one is kind of a similar tone, sharp shaps with simple tools and a half-century of experience. Bonnie Kaler makes shaps that fit like a glove. And you can see there in the picture what she's working with. And the lead says a sharp pair of Ginger scissors and an ancient Singer sewing machine. So everything is working together nicely there. And again, it's a personality profile. So compare that to this. This is one of my favorite illustrations ever. Oops, sorry guys. This is my favorite illustration. If you can't tell, it's a horse trailer going through someone's house, and he was trying to relax on the couch in his underwear. So, but the headline says, a hard journey. My newest horse client had one heck of a drive to get to the clinic. So that immediately tells you the tone that this piece is going to have. Okay, and so as far as how we come up with the headlines, oh, sorry guys, I hit the wrong thing there. Good Lord. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is something that I do. Actually, we do headlines on a variety of pieces. Sometimes it's stories or columns that other people have written that we need to stick a headline on. And sometimes it's our own piece that we really invested a lot of time into. And I think you could do this in either situation. I really like to do it for sure on the pieces that I've written. And I do not do the fun little graphics there with the beautiful colors. I scribble on a legal pad. but but what I do is just kind of play some word association games and think about, read over my interview notes, think about what it was like if I was there in person. And often, if I was in person, I will have already made some notes about what I saw, just what the environment was like. There was one interview that I went out on that I made notes about the drive there. You drive by oil wells and cattle pastures and wheat fields to get to this guy's house. And it really represented kind of who he was, just a sense of place. And so, write down any key phrases. If there's any wordplay, quotations that are relevant, anything you can think of. And quite often this will help you write your story as well. It gives you some words that you can work into your story. And I've noted here, I do use the thesaurus function, but be careful with that because different words have different connotations. So you want to make sure that you're not sacrificing accuracy just for the sake of alliteration or a funny wordplay or something like that. You want to make sure that you mean what you say. So just as an example on this, I recently did a story on a Makati maker, who those are main hair Makatis that you twist the main hair into strands and then you twist the strands into a rope, and turns into a very beautiful rope that you can use then as a rein. And it's very steeped in tradition. It goes way back. So playing word association with that, I just wrote down things like main hair, Makati, twisting, tradition, traditional, cowboy, vaquero, all the words that seemed relevant. And the headline that we ended up with for that was twisting tradition. So that's kind of how that was useful there. So, okay, some other tips. This first one really is my number one tip on how to be a good writer, whether that you're talking about copy or headlines or anything, is just to read lots of good writing. Rick Bragg is one of my favorite authors. He used to write for the New York Times and has since authored several books, but just the descriptive language that he used was amazing. It just made me feel like I was right there looking at the same thing he was looking at. So, if you've got some favorite authors, read them as much as you can. Even fiction is good. Anything that just keeps your creative juices flowing, you can learn from their descriptions, how they transition from one topic to another, how they end a story. There's so many good ideas out there. So brainstorming with coworkers is another great idea. I really like to emphasize keeping writing conversational. So if you can't say something out loud easily, your readers are not going to be able to read it easily. If it doesn't roll off your tongue, they're going to stumble over it as well, because they're reading it in their head silently as they read. So, so saying things out loud is a great tip. And I work from home, so I have to talk to myself. But if you talk to a coworker, you might not look quite as crazy. So, okay, and then think about the whole package. And that's, you want everything to work well together. And depending on the type of story you're doing and depending on your production process, I know this is going to be a little different for everyone, but you really want everything to work well cohesively. An example I've got from that, we have a story coming out in our next issue on Taylor Sheridan, who is the producer of Yellowstone, and really cool guy. He's bringing, kind of a new generation of Westerns to people. And I don't remember what the original headline on the story was, but it didn't work with the lead art. We had a cool photo of Taylor standing in a dusty corral wearing chaps and a cowboy hat and these aviator sunglasses, and it just screamed Hollywood cowboy, so but the headline didn't say that. So so I did some word associations there, and the first thing that I thought when I saw that photo was John Wayne. It just looked like John Wayne. So I Googled John Wayne movies just to get a list of everything. I'm not a big enough fan that I knew them by heart, but the first thing that came up was True Grit. And so the headline that we ended up going with for this story was New Grit. So anyway, that's just an example of being willing to reevaluate when you get things laid out and your headline does not work. Don't be afraid to go back to the drawing board and see if you can come up with something different. So, and remember Aunt Martha. Did anybody learn about Aunt Martha in school? Maybe not. But I had a great professor who talked about Aunt Martha, and this is relevant, maybe more for the subheads or for a news headline. But the idea was to tell Aunt Martha what you're working on. Aunt Martha is old and crotchety, and she's probably not paying very close attention and not going to give you a lot of time, but you want to tell her what you're working on. So you have to sum it up just in a sentence or two. And, you know, an example would be the Boots O'Neill story. You know, it's pretty easy on that one. This dude is 89 years old. He's been a cowboy forever. He's worked on all the ranches in the West. And by the way, his name is Boots. So there you go. And there was our headline. Some people, I've heard the analogy of elevator doors. You know, pretend that you're talking to someone who's in an elevator and the doors are closing. So you only have a minute to boil it down and sum it up. I kind of like the Aunt Martha analogy just because it adds a little bit of personality to it. And I need to tell Aunt Martha why I'm excited about this story. Why do I care about it? And why should she care about it? So that's just a good exercise to help you with your headline as well as, you know, to sum up your story. When sometimes you're dealing with a mountain of interviews, research papers, things like that. Sometimes it's helpful to kind of go through that exercise and try to boil it down. So, and guys, that's all I've got. So please let me know if you have any questions. And I will stop sharing my screen and hand it back over to you guys.
Thanks, Holly. I'm going to go ahead and have Taylor jump in so she can get her part in, and then we'll open it up for questions. But please, if something came up from Holly, don't hesitate to just go ahead and throw it in the chat right now.
All right, so forgive me, I really don't do presentations all that often. I'm always typically on the other side of things. I'm listening to presentations and then writing those up. But my name is Taylor Leach, and like Jennifer said, I am a digital content producer for Dairy Herd Management, which is part of the Farm Journal brand. A little bit about me: I grew up on my family's dairy outside of Kansas City, and I now live in Wisconsin for the last about 2 years or so, where I farm alongside my fiance's family, where we have about 80 cows, give or take, 1,400 acres of cropland, and we own part of our own cheese business as well. So I'm constantly writing about what my audience is interested in. I'm kind of living, you know, the same lives that they are, which I really value. So I will get into, let's see how this, there we go. So like Jennifer said, I am a digital content producer, which is kind of it's a hard title to describe because I do a lot of things each day. One of my main roles is kind of fine-tuning our website, making sure that we have new content on there each day, posting some of our stories to social media, and distributing them through newsletters. So I'm trying to touch our audience in a variety of ways digitally. So I get a lot of questions on why should our headlines be SEO friendly. So SEO stands for search engine optimization. So it's kind of like the formula Google uses to get those stories towards the top of their search bar. And one thing I like to remind people of is we spend so much time doing our homework, writing these stories, reaching out to sources. Sometimes we spend hours or days on a story, but if you can't get people to click on that story, then it sounds bad, but like, what was the point? You put all of this effort into writing it, and if you can't get them to click on it, then it almost feels like that was wasted. So really put some time and effort into thinking about your headline. A lot of times it's just an afterthought for digital content. You spend so much time writing the actual story itself that you might put the headline together in a few minutes. But I really want you to kind of, think on those a little bit more and like help those stand out. So internet users are constantly searching for the information that they need. So how many times are you on Google each day, or even on Facebook searching for different things? And there are thousands and thousands of articles out there that you have to compete with. So just take some time to think like your audience would. What are they going to type into that search bar? What are they looking for? Those kinds of things. So as a digital content producer, I'm constantly promoting our stories on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, as well as, your emails. So one thing that I like to think about is, how am I going to stop my producer from scrolling? When you're on Facebook or even your email, I mean, you are just kind of quickly scrolling through, and there's a lot of different things competing for your attention. When you're on Facebook, you might see a picture of your high school friend's dog, and that might get more attention than, the story that you just put a lot of effort into. So thinking about how you're going to prevent them from just scrolling. I mean, it might stop and grab their attention for just a split second, but you want them to click on it as well. So using a combination of power words, emotional words to help draw your audience in is going to be really beneficial. And then one thing that I try and do whenever I'm writing a story is just think like your audience. So I am constantly writing for dairy producers, and I grew up as a dairy farmer. And I utilize my fiance a lot and some of the farmers in my lives, and I put myself in their shoes, and I think, what would my dad type into the search bar if he was looking for a story about corn prices next year, or feed costs? Or what are some of the keywords that he's going to search for? It's often just one or two words that they're looking for, or a how-to question. It's not this a long drawn out title. And we're writing for humans as well, not just Google. So what emotional words are going to grab your attention? So some of the things whenever I'm writing headlines for SEO, there's a few tricks that I like to incorporate now and then. One of those is including numbers. So numbers really stand out in a headline. Lists are really pretty easy for your readers to digest. So one title that I wrote recently is, "These 7 transition period diseases are costing you money." And the reader interprets that as, here's 7 things that I need to look for, and why are they costing me money? Using attractive adjectives. A story that I wrote recently was the simple formula for taking a better silage sample. I could have just used "take a better silage sample" as my headline, but kind of breaking that down and using some of that sexy language, this simple formula, helps elevate that just a little bit. And then using call to action words, just creating a sense of urgency. A lot of how-to phrases can be used here, or asking questions is another great way to bring or draw your audience in. And then keep it short whenever you can. When you type in a phrase in your search bar, a lot of times people are on their phones, so there's only so much room for just a few words on there. So trying to keep it short whenever you can usually is best. And then trust your gut. That's one thing that Jennifer and I talk about quite a bit. Sometimes you try to remember, like, oh, I should include a number in here. I should try and keep it short whenever I can, or should I ask a question? Just write down a bunch of different headline options, and then I guess don't overanalyze it so much. Trying to think what else. I'm really not all that great at giving presentations, guys. I'm really usually better suited towards just like keeping the conversation going. The other thing I guess I would add is just practice makes perfect. Go back and look at some of the headlines that maybe you've written in the past. I know there's some out there that, looking back now, I'm like, I get a little, they're cringeworthy. So kind of keeping track of what you've written in the past and how can you improve on that is another thing that I like to go back and review when I can. So, any questions?
First of all, you're doing a great job, and don't be ridiculous. I think that, you know, as writers, we spend a lot of time kind of just doing it. You know, that's why, you know, I like when you point out the whole trust your gut, because it's just something that over time you just build and you do. And I don't even really know. I was on a K-State class the other day and trying to explain how I do some things that I do. And I found it very hard to put it into words because it's just, I don't know. So I thought you did a great job of both of you of giving tangible ways that we can make some improvements. And I do think it's interesting too. I don't know, Holly, like, I know you said that you work from home, and Taylor does as well, and I do as well, you know. And so one thing that I will do a lot is I will send Taylor like 3 headlines, like, do any of these hit you? And try to kind of get some, you know, sometimes I find that on our team, we do a lot of brainstorming more so on headlines, because I think we've realized how important it is to just get that right headline. Is that something that, how does that process look for you when you're working on those for the magazine?
Yeah, it's really similar. We will often send out some emails, even a group text. We have a couple of journal staffers on a group text, and we'll just go, hey, how about this? So, but yeah, sometimes it really does take a village, you know, and, you know, yeah, brainstorming is definitely a thing. And even on Teams, you know, we've got so many options when everyone's working remotely that we can still brainstorm.
And I find it interesting too. We have like a headline, and there's like websites that you can analyze headlines. And sometimes that's helpful to me because it helps me think about, oh, maybe that isn't the best word. If I change that word, like, wow, that really resonates with this headline analyzer. And at the end of the day, sometimes Taylor and I aren't sure that's really very helpful, because sometimes your gut is better. What is better. So, well,
I just
on to the question. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Taylor.
No, you're fine. I just dropped the link for the headline analyzer tool that Jennifer and I use quite a bit, but that's also where the trust your gut thing comes into play a lot of time. I think the analyzer is really, you know, it's kind of a robot, so it doesn't necessarily resonate with the audience that I'm writing for all the time. So don't always trust whatever it has to say, I guess would be the word of caution I'd offer.
Yeah, very good. I'm thinking of length of headlines, but I may come back to that. Let's scooch over to the questions because we've got some good ones coming in. Let's start with Dal asks, Taylor, do you do searches to figure out SEO?
Yeah, so a lot of times whenever I'm writing a story, before I even kind of, I guess, begin writing, I'll go on to Google and just type in a few of the keywords that are going to be pretty well used in my story. So just going onto Google and typing in some different phrases that, you know, the farmers in your lives might use is a tip that I'd pass along. I don't know, Jennifer, is there anything that you, I guess, do whenever you're writing a story for digital?
Well, I would say that that's probably an area that I've been kind of pulling my hair out on, like, you know, not necessarily knowing the best way to handle some of that. And I just run out of time. I feel like I'm trying to churn so much content out, but I think you bring up an excellent point. If we're not reaching our audience with great stories, we're kind of doing ourselves a disservice. So I think finding that balance is challenging. And so I do sometimes do searches. But yeah, I'm welcome other people's comments or ideas in the chat, because that's not something that I feel like I have as good of a handle on as I wish I did. So I'm laughing about Miranda's question because I've only been in this role for 3.5 years. So I know that's very short compared to some of you who've been writing about, like Holly, been like in some time, and you're having to come up with all these, not using, but how do you avoid using the same catchphrases? Because I already feel like, oh, I think I've already used that headline. But when you're the same thing over and over year after year, any tips from you guys about that?
Yeah, that is an issue. I mean, sometimes we are doing the same things over and trying to make them sound new. But just an example with us is our world show every year. We do a wrap-up story on all of the world champions, and that's what it is, just a wrap-up story on the world champions. So, I would say look for the new, look for any new angle, what was different this year, because there's got to be something that's noteworthy and new, and play off that. And yeah, don't be afraid to go back and look at your past issues to make sure that you're not reusing the same headlines. So because we've done a lot of, we are the champions, on top of the world, things like that for world shows. So we do have to be careful not to reuse that.
Taylor, do you have anything else on that one?
I really liked Holly's point in one of her slides that talked about like using other authors as inspiration as well. That's one thing that I like to do. I know we've got a couple of strong writers for Farm Journal that I really admire, and I kind of just take a mental note of some of the headlines that they're using, and then putting my own creative spin on them as well, and just kind of tailoring them down to fit my specific audience a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was just going to maybe throw in, because it kind of goes with this, but one of the things I think is helpful too is like cluing into something unique that maybe your source said. So I'm always looking for that. Like when I'm doing an interview, I'll highlight things that I think stand out to me as, oh, that's a neat phrase. And I've learned like people that I can write about where I'm like, man, this economist is always going to say something crazy and outlandish, but it'll draw people into a story, and it's just different. And so I think that that's kind of the fun of it too, is yes, it may be the same topic year after year, but you're getting to hopefully interview different people, or at least talk to them at different times. So who knows what kind of spin they may put on it. So sometimes I just try to pull out from what they say specifically. And I like Rick's idea. I don't know if you guys can see it. For those of you who might be calling in, Rick said that he sometimes types headlines into the search bar to see if there are similar ones out there and what they lead to. And I think that's a really great idea. So Taylor, the next question from Jenny: how do you like to measure if these SEO headlines are working for you, or if you need to adjust your strategy?
Yeah, and that's something that we've been working a lot with right now in Farm Journal. So we use a tool, so Google Analytics, to kind of measure where our audience is coming from, maybe what platforms they're utilizing. And one of the areas that we're able to kind of break down in there is just if they're coming to us from Google. And that's kind of a number that we'd like to see be a little bit higher, I guess, if that makes sense. We want to show up at the top of our Google search page. As far as measuring that, I don't know. I guess for everyone else, since we're so specific, we use Google Analytics all the time. But I guess if you're posting your stories like on social media, what are some of the interactions and engagement that you're getting there? If you have maybe a more bland title, you're probably not going to be getting any or as many likes or clicks versus a headline that might be a little more unique or a little bit more snappy. So I guess just using those different analytic tools, and kind of just keeping a good gauge on them. I don't know, is there anything else that you'd add? I know I keep asking you because we kind of have the same role sometimes, but.
TikTok. You know, I what came to mind as you were talking too, and just thinking about kind of the things that we all do. I mean, there's the reality that we need to get readers in, and we want to draw them in, and we want them to click on those stories. And I think, you know, Dal asked a question down here again about clickbait, but the truth is, in addition to those stories, I mean, like I can't write some of those stories that are gonna, you know, we like to say they're not really going viral, but go out there and get seen a lot and get reshared. I mean, I also have to write stories about diarrhea, and I have to write stories about, you know, African swine fever preparedness. And there's just some things that we have to do that's the service of what we do. And that finding that balance, I think, is what's interesting. You know, kind of to your point, Jenny, of how yes, you've got to do some of those things and you need to draw people in, but at the end of the day, you've got to make sure that your brand is standing for something too, and that you're providing a service that for your audience too. I don't know. I find that more challenging because I don't think probably that was such a deal when it was only a magazine and we weren't trying to reach this social online audience too, but open to your thoughts and chat on that, guys, as well. Melissa brought up a question that I was going to go into if no one else asked it, but she said, I've noticed a lot of really long headlines lately. Has anyone else noticed this? And is this a new trend? What are your thoughts on that, guys? And I think that extends to, I mean, I think she's probably maybe alluding to a little bit digital, but I think it's print thing too for some publications.
You know, I don't know that that's a trend necessarily, but I think there are some stories that a long headline works on. That Boots O'Neill headline that I used in my slides was extremely long. So, and I know a lot of people would have been tempted to cut it. But I think it worked for that story, especially a long form feature. It kind of sets the tone for the piece that you're about to read. Whereas a newsy, hard news, short, hard hitting, you know, here's the point you need to know. That type of headline is going to be a lot different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree. I think one thing I've noticed is headlines, as far as digital goes, I don't know. You do kind of see a trend where headlines will be almost too short, and I'm kind of confused as like, all right, what is this going to be about? But then there's other times where the headline is just so long that I don't even get through it. I just keep scrolling. So it's kind of hard finding that balance of, you know, giving them just enough information that entices them to click on it, but not keeping it too short that they're kind of like left wondering whether or not that's something that they might be interested in. I personally am not afraid of using a longer headline, just if it's specific, I guess. When in doubt, I would rather add one or two more words just for my particular audience that's going to maybe entice them in versus leaving those words out and I guess leaving them wondering. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think so. I think one of our colleagues uses very long headlines, and I'm always like, can we cut about 5 words out of here? Maybe 8 words. You know, and I try to like, because when I started, it was like 70 characters and I tried to stay to that. And I think that's a pretty good rule is what usually they say for online, but sometimes they have to be longer. And I think that's okay too. And I guess to that point, I think that her long headlines work and people like them. So anyway.
One other thing, Jennifer, I'll say one other thing about that. You know, in the newspaper business, especially, and some of your publications, I'm sure too, where we're tied to character count to make the headline fit. You know, we're tied to that length of headline to fit the space. And one of the things that copy editors in general tend to lapse into is headlineese. And we use terrible words like nix, for example, because it's short, it's 3 letters, we love it. But no one uses that. No one talks like that. So that's one thing that I would caution against in trying to keep headlines short. For space reasons, it's just to stay away from the headlineese.
It's a good point. Because it's tempting. We used to have to be limited to 70 characters or else it wouldn't fit in our system. And now they've changed. So sometimes it was like, you almost felt like you had to make some errors that you didn't want to make so you would get the most important words in. And I'm glad we aren't anymore, but
yeah.
And one
so
thing
yeah.
For, I guess, for my particular role, I'm building a lot of newsletters. And when you're on your phone, if you have a longer headline, that email subject, it might cut it off at a certain point. So you kind of have to keep those things in mind as well. For our newsletters, we're able to create different headlines. It doesn't have to be the exact one that ran in print. So sometimes I might alter a headline just a little bit so it fits that particular newsletter need. Or for social, different channels, I'm able to switch up the headline a little bit. So I guess don't be afraid to branch out a little bit for digital. That one headline doesn't have to be used for every single brand, or not every single brand, but for every single platform. You can tailor it a little bit to meet those different needs.
Good point. So Casey asks, how do you balance needing more keywords in the headline so Google can find it and keeping it short? And then she also asks, what counts as a power word?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I don't know if I know the answers for all of it. So yeah, like the keywords, I guess, if you could summarize what your article is going to be about in maybe 5 words. So I liked what Holly used about the mane hair, and I guess I'm not as familiar with horses, but the twisting traditions, how she wrote some of those words down. And I think it's important to do that for digital content as well. If I'm writing a story about calf pneumonia, it better include some words like calves, pneumonia, respiratory issues, and then just figuring out if you can plug those words into your headline. At least trying to put at least 2 or 3, I think, in there if you can. You don't have to include all of those keywords, but at least maybe finding those 2 or 3 that are going to resonate with your audience the most. And then as far as power words, I can pass along a few links that I use. There's it kind of breaks it down into like different categories. So there's greed words and words that talk about curiosity and values. And I think the more unique your headline is for Google, the more, I don't want to, like, it's not like a point system, but the higher ranking you might get. So using those emotional words, not just writing for robots, but for your actual audience. Yeah, I don't know. Is there anything you want to add, Jennifer?
I was just laughing at him. Like, I think those robots don't really know what a power word is for agriculture. Because I'm like, that is a power word. I was pretty proud of that power word. And it's like,
yeah.
But so then that's when I sometimes am like, Taylor, this is powerful, right? And she's like, yes, trust your gut. We just have to remind ourselves of that sometimes. But I know, I think of words that kind of, as I think about headlines that work well on social and are kind of draw people in, it's a word that draws people to emotion. And, that's how I feel some of those. When I think of a power word, I kind of think it's going to evoke some kind of emotion, whatever that might be from your story, Holly, do you have other thoughts on any of that?
I don't. I think you guys are on the right track.
So I love Dal's question and I wanted to get to it. And I know we're running close on time, so I apologize. I always say we're going to be 45 minutes, but today we might be just a little bit longer if Holly and Taylor have time. But Dal just said, I've been thinking about clickbait and wondering if there are any lessons to learn, any cautions or encouragement about looking at that. And other people have commented in on that as well. So any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess, sometimes you got to be careful with those headlines that you're writing. I think, don't oversell your story in some cases. You really want to grab those readers in, but you don't want to mislead them in any way. Really trust your gut there. And, you guys don't like clicking on articles that are spammy. I don't know. I guess I don't know what tips I would have to offer there other than just use your best judgment and think about the message that you want to send to your audience, and what do they think that your brand's about. If they think that it's kind of clickbaity and gimmicky, and they might not trust you as much, and they may not want to click on any of your articles going forward. So I don't know, is there any other advice that you guys would pass along?
Yeah, I'll just say I totally agree with that. Whether you're in digital or in print, our object obviously is to draw the reader in and get them to read, but we don't want to lose them after a first couple of paragraphs, and we don't want them to go away mad either. So just clarity and accuracy are the things to stick with, I think.
I think that we all have to remember when we're pushing stories out online and sharing them on social, like I do take it seriously. Like, okay, getting the clicks isn't more important than protecting agriculture in a way. Like, I think there's some sensitive issues that I have to write about from time to time. And I think it's something that you have to weigh heavily, like, okay, this is out there for anybody to see. And so anybody for me means PETA, HSUS, like they see it too. And whenever I write about activism, they are on it every time. So I just have to be careful about those headlines and not to try to create war, if that makes sense, so to speak. Like, might get more readers, but at what cost, And so I want to, like you said, in a way that's professional and doesn't leave them going away angry, Holly. You want them to feel like it was a good experience. So I think there's been great conversation over in the chat. We love that. It's been so fun to see new faces, and I hope you guys will join us again next time. I'm just making sure I didn't miss a question. Nope. Our next one is going to be on March 23rd, and we're going to talk about TikTok, which admittedly, if you were on the conversation at all before people started really getting on, we were talking about how several of us don't know hardly anything about it, except we've seen a few. So that's not really, we don't know a lot. And we're trying to figure out, like, is it something we should be using more, or how is it being used in the livestock industry? And so we're going to have some different, probably more like producer level or company speakers come in to share their thoughts on TikTok strategy. I know several of us more on the ag media side have had side conversations that we're really not sure if it's something to invest in or not, or how we could leverage it. So please join us on that day. Again, I just want to really thank Holly and Taylor. You guys have such fabulous perspectives and ideas, and people are loving it and sharing their applause over in the chat. So thank you so much for making the time today. Any last announcements, Lindsay, or anything else that anybody wants to bring up? Okay, if not, go have a fabulous day. Enjoy. It's already getting cloudy here, so enjoy whatever weather you have and don't get washed away. So take care, guys.